Hello, Teach Jam community. It's Travis Brown, your principal's favorite principal, back again with another exclusive edition of Jam Talks. And I'm here with the one and only Dennis McKesey. Hold on, I need to say Dr. Dennis
Yes,
McKesey,
sir.
who is the CEO, founder of Off School Grounds, OSG, a coalition of really dope educators and principals throughout the country. This man right here, Dr. McKesey, he heads up an organization that thousands of principals run to for support, to pour into each other. And with those thousands of educators, we're touching the lives of hundreds of thousands, millions of scholars. So I really want to take this opportunity to really sit down with this man who's really revolutionized the game, really talk about how COVID really spearheaded this movement first. And then we're going to get into some tough stuff because at Teach Jam, we pride ourselves on being a place where we can have real conversations about urban education and moving forward. So first I want to say thank you, Dr. McKesey, for coming here.
Absolutely.
Really happy
Pleasure.
to have it.
Pleasure.
Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and the origins, that genesis of Off School Grounds, OSG, which is home to so many amazing principals and leaders?
Yeah. Trav, like Dr. Dennis McKesey, been in this beloved profession of ours for over 27 years. From school aide teacher, assistant principal, principal in Harlem for 10 years, executive director of an all-boys charter school in Brooklyn for the past 11. I've been supporting and mentoring principals all across the country. And so during those times, obviously, as a person who coaches and mentors and consults, I bring in a lot of my past experiences as a principal and remember how important it is to have the imagery that it's okay to be who you are. It's okay to be unapologetic about who you are, but it's more important, I think, than anything, to be able to go to work every day and love what you do and never feel like you have to code switch for anybody. And so I think this work has shown me over the years that if you can be yourself and be true to yourself, I think you can make a greater impact, not only on students and staff, but also the larger community as a whole. And so I most certainly welcome every opportunity to coach people about that, about how important it is as a school leader to recognize yourself as a community leader. And so I'm definitely always been excited about this work and stuff like that. And I think what Teach Jam is doing, man, is embodying this conversation in a way that we're reaching far beyond just Pharos Academy, but we're reaching communities on a larger scale.
Yeah, thank you. So tell us a little bit about OSG.
Yeah,
the beginnings of it, and then where you want to take it.
Yeah, I think, I have to start, and it's funny because when I started OSG, it was like a labor of love. It was something that I felt we needed to have a place for educators, but more specifically principals. And it happened during the pandemic where I felt that most of the work that was being done off school grounds. We're talking about ways in which to deal with the financial insecurities, the food insecurities, the tech gap, the leadership development gap. All those things that were happening, I felt like were things that we had to deal with off school grounds, right? Everything was done remotely. So you as a principal had to lead from the perspective of whatever you did, it had to be done off school grounds. And then I thought to myself, to expand it even further, if you're really about this work, if you're going to be real successful, you got to figure out how do you deal with all the elements off school grounds. So all the things that our young people go through and deal with off school grounds, the quicker we're able to recognize that as school leaders, we have the intel to fix it, I think the greater the opportunity for our young people to be able to excel in school and to create that type of environment where we can ultimately change the larger community. So off school grounds most certainly is that space where we have those conversations that are ongoing about how do we improve community. But then one of the twists that we add to it is we brought in, the entertainment, the athletes, the elected officials, other people that are part of the community to be able to say, hey, if we do this collectively, the chances of us changing the lives of these young people can be done in a way that is going to be long-standing and something that's going to be permanent. So I'm just willing to reach out to the Dame Dashes, the Jada Kiss, the Freeways, the list goes on and on of all people who we've been able to partner with in the past to say, look, we all fighting the same fight. instead of us using you as a photo op, why don't you join forces with school leaders across the country, and let's make a big deal about it.
Thank you for sharing that. So this is Jam Talk. So part of Jam Talks, we're gonna get right into it. And you know, couple weeks back, we were on a meetup, the OSG meetup, and you kind of put out a, I don't know what to call it, but you went off.
Yeah.
And you spoke about everybody, you know, coming up to you saying you have some of the flyest, dopest, coolest principals in the community. But then you saying, but some of our scores, some of our test scores, some of our data is not coming back the way you would like it.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about that because as we know representation matters, so as more principals of color get into the game, you put it out there like it's not enough. You got to execute and deliver, and you have to push kids to proficiency like you were able to do as a principal. So can you really talk to that and really just talk to urban educators out there? Because we see a lot of urban educators on there being beautifully them.
Yes.
But beautifully them sometimes is just putting on some cool J's or some cool sneakers, wearing the stuff. And that's cool and all, but just give us your take on that. Like, how do you still be beautifully you, but also push the achievement? Because that's the sole role right there.
Absolutely. Like I said, Trav, you know, again, as a school leader, I was myself all the time. And I just always remember that, you know, being a principal, that our primary responsibility is school improvement and to actually shrink that achievement gap. And oftentimes, I think as leaders, we come up with our own criteria as to what's important. You hear people say it all the time, well, test scores isn't everything. But in the community in which we serve, it may not be everything, but it's a lot. Because when we're talking about college readiness, we're talking about job readiness, what do people use? They use data to determine where you are and whether or not you're going to be one who's fit for that job or fit for that particular college. We get kids all the time that aren't able to pursue their real passions because we keep pushing the agenda away from them that data doesn't matter or those things doesn't matter. And you think we got less than 10% of engineers, doctors, lawyers, all across it. We're talking about high-level jobs where in which we don't have no representation. But what we fail to realize is that we don't lack the intelligence. We lack the ability to be able to take tests, pass tests, and be able to score at high levels. And so if we are having this problem when they get older, why don't we address it when they're younger? Let's talk about it as a principle, how it's more important for you to not only talk about how dope your school is, but use quantifiable measures to determine that, right? And so I can only talk about things from the perspective that I came from. I was a principal in Harlem, and we had achievement of up to 90% proficiency in Harlem in both ELA and math. And I know that it's possible with having almost 100% Black and brown children in my building. I know it can happen. And so it's somewhat offensive to me when somebody talks about being a dope principal or an amazing principal when they don't have the receipts to show that they've actually done the work. And I keep looking at the receipts, not for me to brag about what I did, but to say that my kids are that much more prepared for the future. So I'm always going to be that person that challenges a person who thinks because they put a picture or a video up on Instagram about something that they did for that day and say, I'm a dope principal, or we run a dope school, and be like, nah, show me the receipts, because the future of that child or those students depend on how well they perform, right? And so we got to get to a point where we can't continue to make excuses for, you know, the underachievement of our young people. And I'm talking to you as a Black man and as a Black educator and as a, you know, someone who realizes that it is important, it's extremely important for us to keep the mindset. Let's keep challenging each other. I don't want to challenge you about who's wearing the best sneakers. I don't want to challenge you about who's wearing the best jacket. I don't want to challenge you about who's wearing the best chain and all that kind of stuff. I want to challenge you every day, every year, Trav, like, yo, last year I got 75% proficiency. What you got? And it's never one of those things where I'm rubbing it in your face. It's just me saying, yo, let's challenge each other that way. So I think if we bring those conversations to the forefront, people don't become offended when the conversation needs to be had about, show me your receipts. So I'd most certainly say challenging people is important. but using it as a competitive thing. It's like one of the things I know about you, and what you're doing here at Pharos is you're not even really competing with other people anymore. Like you're competing with yourself. That if you don't have significant gains every year, then you feel like, yo, damn, I didn't do enough. And I think that's the same message for everybody else is how hard are we going to try to outdo not only the person next to us, but outdo ourselves? Because if we both you sitting at 20% proficiency, I'm sitting at 22% proficiency, what are we celebrating? You know what I'm saying? So I definitely feel like it's important that we have those conversations openly and be willing. And that's what I think OSG does probably better than anything that I've ever seen in terms of the collective, is that we keep pushing each other to that level of greatness. Let me use something that Travis does and put it in my school, and let's see if that improves student achievement and stuff like that. And I know you've always been one to say, yeah, I'm a thief. Like I go to schools all the time, or I read something all the time, and I bring it to the school. And when it equates to student achievement being increased, then you've done the right thing.
Thank you for sharing that. Follow up to that, do you think the moves that principals are making to some of these other things, like just for a couple of examples, just, the dances, the parties, the fun stuff, for example, yes, joy is a part of the equation, but when you're doing that, a little bit too often, not focused on the classroom, do you think that is just a symptom of they don't know how to move their school in terms of whether you call a student achievement, whatever measures you're using, whatever measures your districts are using, or whatever district you're in? Do you think there's a lack of skill or know-how? And if so, what advice would you give to an urban leader who is kind of caught in that cycle of, my kids are feeling good, we have a cool school, because everybody's so caught up on the culture, and not understanding that in a great culture where we're dancing and singing and playing around, there's a culture of anti-intellectualism that's brewing in your school right under that culture of fun. So first, do you think it's, I don't know how, so I'm going to run and keep doing this, keep dancing and playing? And then if you think it's I don't know how, where do I go? Where do I start as an urban educator?
Most certainly, I think that part of it is the fake it till you make it kind of ideal, right? Is that I don't really know how to do it. And I feel like because people expect so much from me, I'm hoping to eventually stumble upon that thing. But I think there are a lack of skill sets, because I think when a principal becomes a principal, there's a need for continued leadership development and coaching. Hence, that's why I got into the work that I'm doing now, is because sometimes people don't know what they don't know, Trav. And every single day, the expectations remain high that we want them to produce, but not many people stop to ask, why aren't they producing? So I definitely think skill set is a big part of it. Continued leadership development and coaching is another part of it. But then I also think at times it's the low expectations, period, because what we think is high expectation is just that we do a little better than we did last year. And that's not high expectation. If you got 100% of kids in your school and you're at 20% proficiency, let's flip that. That means 80% of your kids are not proficient. So the conversation has to actually evolve into something about what it is that we are actually doing this work for. And if you're only seeing incremental growth, then chances are you need somebody who may have a different set of eyes to show you, nah, I don't like this, I don't like that. And so, even, the work that, you and I have done here in the past, I remember the time I came here and I was like, yo, Trav, you got such an innovative school, so amazing things going on. And I said, Trav, why don't we move away from bulletin boards a little bit, right? And it might just sound like, yo, we just having a conversation about bulletin boards, but it wasn't that. It was about technology. I said, why don't we take down some of the bulletin boards and put up flat screens? Not for any other reason other than, we want our kids to recognize that their learning styles and things that we're exposing them to is going to go to a different space as well. If I've been in Pharos Academy for 8 years and I've seen the same bulletin boards, where is the innovation when it comes to education? I want your kids, when they come to this school every year, to see something different that they didn't see the year before. So I'm always going to push the narrative that as a principal, you got to be willing to have somebody with a critical eye come in as a critical friend and say, you know what, Dr. Brown, let's change this a little bit. Let's work on that. But then I'm going to use the data to support that. We say to ourselves, I mean, and it sounds crazy. Think about it, Trav. So a bulletin board, you put up a bulletin board for 4 weeks, 6 weeks. The same thing I see for 4 to 6 weeks. Why? If the kids are producing work every day, why aren't we putting work up at least every other day, every 3 days? But we only can do that when we have the right technology in place and stuff like that. So I am pushing the narrative for principals to be willing to be open for coaching and mentoring, and that people are providing that critical feedback that's necessary. So I do think part of it is the lack of skill. The other one is lack of leadership development. But also too, sometimes it's just about this mentality of, if I can do just a little better this year than I did last year, I'm good.
Isn't that celebrated a little bit? You hear principals 2% proficiency, then they're yelling, screaming 22% proficiency. And sometimes we think, well, drowning is drowning. If you drown 2 feet from the ocean floor, or you drown 22 feet from the ocean floor, you're still drowning. Yeah. So we can speak about that, this incremental, like if you're underwater, you're underwater. And how do we change that? Because we don't want to pour water on a fire that's brewing with achievement and growth, right? But how do we temper that a little bit so we're not dancing to our death with this incremental growth that you were just talking about? I went from 2% to 12%. The next year I'm gonna do 22%. Then after that, I'm gonna do 32%. And just kids are coming through the system not learning well. So how do we celebrate growth, but temper that with we're still underwater? What would your message be to leaders?
Yeah, I think when we talk about growth, Travis, I think you can't wait to get the results to say we made improvement, we made growth. What was your goal? What was your goal that you set before the school year started? Don't tell me that you made 3% growth and that was okay after you got the numbers back. If you told me in October or in August or September that you are expecting 20% growth by way of proficiency levels, then let's stick to that. Don't change later on to saying our DRA scores went up or our MAP scores went up. And yet and still, when I look at your New York State ELA math assessment data, you only went up 2%, but you told me you was going up 10%. So I think we got to be very clear about what it is that we're measuring, that we can't just continue to use a variety of different assessments and say, oh, let's choose this one because we made the growth, the highest growth there. You know, as a principal, what it is that people are looking for. When we are putting our children in this school, what are we looking? We're looking at proficiency rates. If Pharos Academy did not have the results that it had, as much as this place is in a beautiful, beautiful space for young people, why would I put my child here? More important than how beautiful this place looks is can my child actually pass the New York State assessment? Will my child have an opportunity to go to an Ivy League college if they choose to? So I think it's going to always be that thing of let's identify what the goal is first and let's stay there. Let's not just don't find 4 or 5 other assessments and say, yeah, we've made growth, because that, I think, becomes the things that we celebrate. I was watching a few months back about when Giannis was talking about when the reporter asked him about, does he think that this school year is a failure? I mean, the season is a failure because they didn't make it to the championship. And I remember people celebrating Giannis by saying, you know what? His response was, was Michael Jordan a failure because he didn't make it 9 years out of the 15 years? And it sounded great, and I think it was a great soundbite. But then let's look at really what that is. Your achievement is everything, because the following week, what happens to his coach? His coach gets fired because they didn't make it to the championship and they didn't win. Now, mind you, we're talking about an NBA coach who won a championship 2 years ago, and you're willing to get rid of him because they didn't reach that. And so I think if the standard is the standard, then let's stay at the standard. Let's not make excuses for why we didn't achieve. And I'm not saying that we should not in some way acknowledge that, but I have a problem with celebrating it, celebrating failure or celebrating just minimal growth. That's our children deserve better than that. And when you're paying for that type of education, nothing else is acceptable. So why is it acceptable in the public school sector? And I think that's got to be the mentality now, that we got to push the agenda towards providing our kids a private school opportunity in a public school as often as possible, because certain things will not be allowed if I was paying for this. What's the difference? So I definitely think, Trav, that it's very important to set the goal in the beginning. Whatever assessment tool I'm using, that's what it is. But the main objective here in all of the schools across this country is how did you perform on your state assessment?
Got it. So can we talk? So thank you for sharing that. Can we talk a little bit about how OSG works in terms of bringing principals together? And the reason why I'm asking this is because it's a really amazing organization where it's bringing principals together. But question I have is, if I'm in New Mexico, if I'm in Seattle, if I'm in Minnesota, places around the country, can I be an OSG? And then also, with that, why is that so important to you to get people together in this education space?
Yeah, because I think, we've always heard that in education, especially educational leadership, that it's a lonely space, and oftentimes we're only reduced to connecting with people in our district. And as a person who consults and works with principals all across the country, what I've noticed is that there are some similarities in all of the struggles that everybody faces. And if you're working in an inner city in Chicago or in Brooklyn or the Bronx or in Vegas and Compton, you're faced with a lot of the same barriers for our kids. And I think that it's important to be able to get people from all parts of the country into a space to have a conversation about, well, Trav, I got some food insecurities in New Mexico. I'm struggling to try to figure out how to address that. You could simply say, well, you know what, here's what we do in the Bronx. Here's a resource that I can offer to you to do that. And so being able to bring everybody together is really just about, I think, just one, finding the similarities, and then also from the similarities, finding the results or finding the answer to many of the problems that face many of our inner city schools. And so why OSG is so important, not only to me, but to other people, is so that you recognize that you don't have to only get the resources from your local district. I should be able to see or be able to connect with you in the East Coast from the West Coast. If there's something that you can support me with, why not? And I think we've always found a way to be very competitive as leaders, but very seldom do we become resources for one another. And I want to be able to be that person to say, let me be the conduit between you and a principal in Atlanta, or you and a principal in Massachusetts, or you and a principal in New Mexico, or even out of the country. And so I think being able to create such a space that on a weekly basis we have, what we call a meetup, bringing people together virtually every single Thursday from 3:30 all the way up to 6 at times weekly is important. And I think in order for us to drive the agenda around school improvement, it has to be a collective effort. That there, most of the time you think about a district that's failing. Why do you think they're the only people who have the answer? If everybody's failing, then the answer can't be there. Let me go find it somewhere else. And I'm just encouraging folks to be able to do that. I mean, just a few years ago, you remember, about 17, 20 of us, we went all the way out to Compton to help support our brother Rob. We're talking about principals from across the country converged on the U in Compton to go support Rob about his school improvement efforts. So I think that's an important piece. Identifying the similarities and then providing our resources to help support them in their advancements.
So I want to thank you. This has been just super enlightening for me, especially as a sitting principal. And, we've had countless conversations. So we're going to end, but I want you to end on a special. You got the camera. The Teach Jam community of educators out there. If you're speaking to an aspiring principal, assistant principal, principal in a seat, what are two pieces of really key advice that you would give them in terms of they've been celebrating that growth underwater, right? They've been shifting more towards the fun stuff and avoiding those hard conversations. Yeah, my kids are happy, so 20%, 22% is okay. What would you say as the leader of such a large organization of principals and pushing those people to increase the standard and expectation? What would you say to somebody in that kind of cycle?
One, I think, is kind of, although qualitative data is important, really make quantitative data just as important. And being able to truly assess growth and development through quantifiable data. You know what I'm saying? The eye test that I think most people use to determine how dope they are, how dope their schools are, can play tricks on you after a while. And so I think as an educator, we got to be able to quantify the results that we say that we are doing. If you say you dope, let your numbers prove that, right? You can't say you're a dope principal or that you're doing dope things in your school and you're at 20% proficiency. You shouldn't allow yourself to be able to say that. Even if you believe that, you should not allow yourself to say that, because that's not dopeness. If you're not going to be that person that's closer to 100% rather than closer to zero, then there's a problem there. So I think being able to add the quantifiable piece to it is important. And I think the other part too, Trav, is keeping this in mind, is that in a day and age where technology, virtual meetings and everything is so available, we no longer have to work in isolation. We never have to ever say again, we don't have somebody that we can connect to or somebody we can connect with. And so I created OSG for that reason, so that no one in this organization ever has to feel like they're alone ever again, that you can always be able to reach out to your brother, your sister, or chime in on a Thursday meetup and have a conversation about the things that are going on. And so I think those two things, Trav, is that, again, add more quantifiable data to prove your dopeness. And then secondly, the other part is that you don't no longer have to do this work by yourself, that you have access to the world now by way of virtual access. I think you should take full advantage of that.
Powerful. So you heard Dr. McKesey talk about the eye test. You just witnessed the eye test. He's real right here. So I want to thank the Teach Jam community for showing out again. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Jam Talk. But I just want to close by saying you better be dope by the numbers. And I understand as principals, we're all in different places, but let's keep pushing ourselves. Just like the great words of Dr. McKesey, let's get dope by numbers. So joy matters in schools. Make sure our babies are fed and happy. But our true dopeness is when we get the numbers there. So let's keep striving. And again, Dr. McKesey, thank you for your time. And tell them how they can get in touch with OSG, please.
Absolutely. I mean, again, you can go over to Instagram, the official OSG. You can go onto our website, the official OSG as well. And again, if nothing else, just reach out to my brother, Dr. Travis Brown at Farrell's Academy, or here at Teach Jam, and he'll make sure to connect us all.
Yeah. So thank you again for your time. It was brought to you by Teach Jam, of course, our partners at Red Bull and Dean's List. We'll see you next time on Jam Talk. Thank you.